Hello, welcome to the first of 4 Special Gardeners World programmes, celebrating the best of the whole of this gardening year. And it's been a strange year. We've had weather that at best is unpredictable and at worst has really been very unseasonal. But funnily enough, the garden didn't seem to mind that much, although there were a few odd bits of behaviour. But that's gardening for you. You never quite know what's going to happen, except for one thing. It's going to give you a huge amount of pleasure and satisfaction. And that's what we want to share with you today. Coming up on today's programme, Sue and Toby share winter gardening tips on Sue's allotment in Swansea.
So to deter the birds, I use the old freezer
Drawers, don't they?
Yeah. And they do seem to keep the birds off from pulling things up randomly.
This is classic allotment stuff, isn't it?
It is.
Waste not, want not.
Professor Nigel Dunnett is best known as a pioneer for sustainable planting in public spaces. But Arit visits him in his own garden at home.
Looking at all of the conditions of this site, it's not really the ideal space, is it, to create a garden?
For me, it presents so many challenges but also so many opportunities, because there are lots of different environments, mini environments in the garden, that I could really exploit that to the full by making a garden full of different areas.
And we're shown round a coastal garden that is hidden away, perched on the side of a cliff.
This is the last tree we bring. Or is it?
This is a panicum, and it's one of the many plants that I'm lifting and putting to one side. I'm storing them in a nursery bed as part of the big replanting and replanning of the cottage garden. In fact, it's no longer going to be a cottage garden. I'm going to focus on making this as good a rose garden as I possibly can. And part of that will be to rethink the accompanying plants so that the garden looks as good as it can for as long as it can. Now, earlier this year, in January, Carol went down to Sittingbourne in Kent to celebrate one of the most glorious of our winter flowering plants.
Well, it's a brisk, cold winter's day, but how about these for winter warmers? Look at the sun streaming through these petals. Amaryllis are low-maintenance shrubs. They're tough and provide not only colour, but they have a wonderful, distinctive fragrance. The air is just full of their beautiful perfume. While our deciduous trees with their naked silhouettes conserve their energy, the amaryllis has been lying in wait, ready to jolt our senses with its winter fireworks. These glowing flowers are guaranteed to make you feel warm and happy. But when you get close and personal, that magic continues. These flowers are so intriguing. There's something very surreal, otherworldly about them. Just look carefully here. Each little flower has 4 petals. They're almost kind of spidery, really skinny, that must have evolved to make sure that it doesn't suffer too badly if it gets frosty and cold. And they're all borne in clusters, so 4 or 5 little flowers all together. And it's this wonderful scent that draws in pollinating insects, which are flying around at this time of year. And it's these insects that pollinate witch hazels. By flowering early, they offer a nectar-rich feast, when pickings are otherwise pretty slim. Any later, and they'd be in competition with the likes of cherry and crabapple blossom. The spectrum of colours ranges from pale lemony yellow through to orange, copper, and even dark red. And that's all down to years of clever breeding between species. The ones that we're really interested in as gardeners are these two. One is mollis, it's from China, with these big flowers, longer petals, and it's also got the most glorious scent. On the other hand, this is amaryllis japonica, obviously from Japan. And here you get a much wider variety of colour, but much more crinkly petals, not nearly as showy as mollis. But look at those lovely colours there, the colour of a blood orange. Aren't they gorgeous? But the ones that we really want in our gardens are these, hybrids between the japonica and mollis. They're called intermedia, so there'll be amaryllis, intermedia, and then a variety name. This one's Orange Beauty. And as with all good children, they've got the very best of both parents. So they've got the showiness of amaryllis mollis, but they've also got the colour range that's inherited from the amaryllis japonica. And in almost all cases, wonderful scent. The collection has around 130 cultivars, all with their own different qualities. But there are a few that really stand out. This is one of the most popular of all varieties of amaryllis. It's Amaryllis intermedia pallida, and it's an absolute delight. These specimens here are probably full grown, but it's slow growing, really suitable for a small garden. And it flowers from really quite early on too. And those flowers aren't just the most gorgeous, enticing colour, but the scent is beautifully fragrant, a mixture of honey and nutmeg. Each of these witch hazels probably smells quite different. So when you're selecting one for your garden, you don't just want to look at the colour and the stature, but you want to give it a good sniff too and make sure it's got just the right perfume for you. Flowers can last anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks in mild weather, or 3 to 4 weeks if it's really cold. But most importantly, unlike many early flowering shrubs such as magnolias, their flowers remain unscathed by frosts. They'll take as low as -10 without any damage to their blooms. Look at this glowing in the sunshine. You almost feel like you could warm your hands on it. This is one of my favourites, I think, and she's called Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And you'd want to get up close to her, wouldn't you? It's one of the best for perfume, and such beautiful flowers too. And if you look closely at these petals, the colour is more intense the closer to the actual tiny flower in the middle. Those are probably pollen lines, so they draw the insects in and show them exactly where the flower is. Many cultivars give you not just 1, but 2 hits of colour, because when temperatures drop around September to October time, they provide wonderful autumn leaf colour too. All yellow flower varieties of witch hazel almost have their own internal light. They glow wherever you put them in the garden. But when it comes to these gorgeous red flowered varieties, and you've got to think much more carefully about where they're going to be situated. They look at their best if you can put them somewhere where they can be backlit, preferably first thing in the morning as the sun comes up and last thing in the evening as it sets again. That way you'll really enjoy the subtlety of these beautiful flowers. In their native habitat, they grow under the canopy and protection of bigger trees. So, especially if you're in a cold and drafty garden, plant them in a sheltered position. And when you're planting them, enrich the soil with as much organic matter as you can. Don't plant them anywhere where it's wet. But because they're quite superficially rooted, ensure that they don't dry out during the summer by applying a really lovely thick mulch. Witch hazels are slow growing and rarely need pruning, but if they do need a trim, cut back any wayward branches after flowering. One way and another though, they're easy and accommodating shrubs, and quite frankly, there's nothing to touch them in the winter garden. January and February can be a bleak time of year, but if you plant a witch hazel in your garden, you're guaranteed, right in the depths of winter, this wonderful display of fiery blossom and the most gorgeous scent pervading the cold air.
I have to say I love witch hazel, but it's really difficult to grow here. I have about 4 or 5 and none of them are very satisfactory because our soil is really too heavy for it and it's too wet here. They love good drainage. So if you've got sandy soil or chalky soil, then definitely grow one. And you go out tomorrow, buy one, plant it. It won't grow much before flowering, but it should flower for you in January or February. Now, this area here is our nursery beds. It's behind the scenes, we don't often film here, but it's incredibly useful to have somewhere where you can heel in plants, you can raise seedlings, you can even sow seeds on an outdoor seed bed. They grow on, they're in our soil rather than potting compost, so the whole relationship between roots and soil is preserved, and then I can lift and plant them where I want them. So, for example, I've got these hardy geraniums, and I could at this point break them up and divide them up and get more plants. But I think for the moment, I want to just plant these straight out. So I'll start at the back here and just make a slight hole. I say we've got heavy soil. Of course, I realise that what you're looking at is 30 years of mulching and adding compost. And so our heavy clay has become a lovely clay loam. And I hope that's inspiration. If you have got really heavy clay, don't give up. Keep adding organic material, and it does make lovely soil if you just keep adding to it. So this can go in the ground. Let's pop this in. Simple as that. Pop that in like that. Pull the soil around it. Let's heel it in gently, and that will be very happy for the foreseeable future. I've got some Nepeta too. Nepeta is a Mediterranean plant, so again, is a plant rather like amaryllis that does much better with good drainage, and of course has lovely glaucous leaves and blue flowers, brilliant for attracting bees. Cats love it, catnip. The downside for us is it tends to grow too lush and collapse, but then you just cut it back and it will regrow. So it's incredibly useful. So I'll just pop this in next to it, and again, that will be fine. It's completely hardy. It'll die right back, but be completely safe. We're off now to the Cornish coast to visit the allotment of Vicky Ward and Maxine Stringer. But this is no ordinary allotment.
Oh, hang on, hold on. OK. The Lottie is the ultimate coastal garden retreat. Prepare yourself to be a little bit surprised.
Wait, I thought we were waiting for you because you went first last time. Right, OK, you go first.
My name's Maxine.
And I'm Vicky.
And we are in our coastal garden. She's just on the outskirts of Polperro in Cornwall. So historically, in the olden days, to subsidise the fishing industry of the village, there were working gardens, coastal gardens, allotments, hence why we lovingly call our space the Lottie, as a friendly wink to that.
We've got a tiny old fisherman's cottage. Unfortunately, there is no garden. But I say unfortunately, because if we had have had one, we would have never have discovered this.
Our lives are incredibly busy, and it's great to have a piece of escapism.
A lady who lives in the village has got an allotment next door, and she very kindly showed us up here, and we just loved it. It's accessed only from the coastal path down sort of quite a steep slope. There aren't any steps.
Oh, nearly there.
It opens up into a 3-tiered space, hence why we have ladders and all sorts to get from A to B. And we didn't used to have ladders, did we?
No, that's quite a luxury. This is the last tree we bring. Or is it?
When we got to our allotment space, I mean, it was just incredibly difficult. You couldn't even get access down to it. Yeah, anything that'll hurt you was there.
We decided fairly early on that it would be lovely to combine a space that we could enjoy, but equally it also be complementary to the vista and to the wider environment.
We call this a circus. It was inspired by a trip we had in our camper van where we saw a fire pit with circular seating and thought, that'd be brilliant for the lottie. I saw the sign in a vintage shop, so it became the circus and it started as naming all the different zones.
So the feel that we were looking for in this area is quite jungly, but equally I would like, the vision was to be quite nestled. This is St John's wort. The bees love it and many of the other pollinators that we have here, and it actually acts as a natural windbreak. That hebe was planted probably, 6-7 years ago, and it was tiny. I clearly hadn't appreciated quite how much it'd enjoy lottie life. It's found its spot, shall we say.
The aeoniums started off with just a very small plant, probably 2 plants, and it just went crazy. We never expected for them to like it so much.
Tree ferns like it to be fairly moist, and up here, certainly in the summer months, it can be quite barren and quite dry. But thanks to Vicky's research, she's got some magic food that she puts on it.
We actually used alpaca poo. It comes in liquid form, thankfully, through the post.
We're not bringing alpacas up here.
No, not yet. You never know.
And it's gone off like topsy though, hasn't it?
Yeah. One of the areas down here is particularly challenging because you've got sun all day. It's very drying. There's been a lot of trial and error with what works down here. And I found that the best thing that works is wildflower seeds. I'm not sure it works for Maxine because she always goes to me, did you want it to look like that?
This is true.
You said it the other day.
Is this the look you were going for, Vicky?
We inherited the bear's breeches. It's taken quite something to actually have something other than the bear's breeches. We've planted verbena and there's a bottle brush.
Getting here from the house varies really, depending on what one is choosing to bring up. So, for example, if you're just bringing up a few bedding plants, that will take probably 20 minutes.
But if you're carrying a shed, 10 hours.
That did happen.
It did happen. In the olden days, they used to bring things up and down on donkeys, so that would have been helpful. Can we get a donkey?
Let's give it some thought.
Hi, Andy.
We're in the Zen garden, and this area really is all about that opportunity to exhale.
But it is very exposed. It gets dry very quickly. And also, if it's cold or it's really windy, things get damaged. We did have 2 echiums that were in here, and unfortunately, they just didn't work through the winter. So we've recently put succulents in, because succulents really work in here.
The other plant that I particularly like to have dry boots would be the mallow. That's really running on and on.
This is the Zen Den. When you've got a vision of something, it's all about getting there. So that's what motivates me. Because I remember the day we finished this, we were just so euphoric.
Absolutely elated.
It works really well as a water collector. So we utilise the bamboo here, so it comes off the roof and then flows into this old 50-gallon galvanised tank here.
This area makes me feel as though it's okay to put your clippers down, and sit down and relax and enjoy.
And you feel like you're somewhere else.
Yeah, it's okay.
Maxine suggested that we went for a Mediterranean garden.
There's a few plants that seem to have found their happy place there. An olive tree. There is a lemon tree. There is a salvias. Californian poppies really like it there.
It just brings me so much joy. I don't know how else I can put it, really.
The lottie means everything. It's an opportunity for not only the plants' personalities to shine, but also our personalities, our creativity. You don't need to conform here. We spend our days conforming and adhering to rules, and no rules, which is great.
That site might be very steep and awkward to get at, but how beautiful is that position with the view and the aspect? A wonderful site. Now I've got here some amaryllis. Amaryllis is an enormous bulb, quite expensive too, but worth it because it does make a spectacular flower. If you put it up in the beginning of December, you can give it as a gift to somebody over Christmas, or you can have it flowering for yourself in February and into March in some of the darkest days of winter, and I love them. This is a variety called Picardy, which has got white petals rimmed with red and is a really good doer. Now, all amaryllis, despite the size of the bulb, like to be in constricted conditions. That's why I've got a range of pots, because actually, a pot like that, which is almost looks like a glorified mug, would take an amaryllis of that size. The downside of that is if you've got a big amaryllis flower, and it can be as tall as that, maybe 2 or 3 stems, it's very top heavy. So what I do is I compromise. I use a pot that has got about 1 inch all around it. You need crocks to make sure the drainage hole doesn't get blocked, and a really gritty mix. Basically, it's a good idea to make up a mix for all your bulbs that need good drainage, which is fundamentally 50% grit and 50% a good peat-free compost. This is really important. It must have good drainage. And you sit the bulb, so you've got the roots down in, and then just work the soil around it. So it's sitting almost on top of the soil like an egg, ready to go. Water it, and then you can either just leave it out, or if you want to bring it on a bit quicker, put it somewhere dark for about 4 weeks, and you'll start to see the shoots. Once they're 1 inch or 2 long, take it out, and the brighter and the warmer the place you put it in, the sooner it will flower. And when you've got a really good flowering stem with a bud on it, then you can put it where you want to enjoy it most. Now, what we find is that it doesn't need to be on a windowsill. It doesn't need to have any extra heat. A normal house heat, middle of a table, is absolutely fine. And the cooler it is, the longer the flowers will last. And by cool, I mean sort of down to about 15 degrees. And it should flower for weeks and weeks. Right, those are now potted up. And I can put them in a dark place. Still to come on today's programme. Arit visits Professor Nigel Dunnett at home near Sheffield to see how he tends his own garden.
This is really self-supporting. There's nothing here that falls over, and it's tightly packed. I couldn't get in there any way to look after it, so it has to look after itself. As we get later in the year and into winter, this all ripens off into wonderful seed heads which really catch the light. So it's a really long season part of the garden.
And Toby joins Sue on her allotment in Swansea to help with a few winter jobs.
Right.
I am struggling with my red onions. For some reason, they don't develop.
You see that bottom? It's called the basal plate.
Yeah.
And if you push them in, you can damage that, and that can really ruin the onion's chances. And you should make a little hole and then drop them in. That's the way forward.
Right, OK. I might have been being a bit rough.
Really? Do you think that's what it was?
Yeah.
If you've got a lawn or grass of any kind that is mown, the chances are you'll have a mower. But whether it be petrol or battery, mowers at the end of the summer are likely to be pretty dirty, pretty battered, and it's not a good idea to put them away in that state. You want to put it away in the condition that you want to take it out again next spring. Now, obviously it needs a wash, but the most important thing is to look what's underneath. If you've got a petrol-driven one, take the spark plug out, clean it up, and clean up all around it. But whatever type, turn it on its side, and this is the business end. Now, the blade is like any blade, really. It needs to be sharp. So what I always do is take it off at this stage, which is easy enough. Just undo the nut, take out the screw, there we go, and take the blade off. You can see there are nicks in it. It's a bit battered. Inevitably, it's hit stones. If it's really bad, then you can take it in to a lawnmower specialist and have it resharpened. But usually, you can just use a file and just very simply sharpen it up. It doesn't have to be razor sharp, but that gets rid of the bluntness. And work the other side. Clean it off very simply. You can see there's rust underneath there, which is inevitable if you've got dirt. And we can just brush that off with a wire brush. Get rid of all the rust, sharpen the edges, oil it, and it's ready to go back on. But before you put it back on, get a scraper and then clean all the accumulated soil and worm casts and dried grass. Get it all off. It's not difficult, but just scrape it off like this. Once you've scraped off as much as you can, get a stiff brush and some soapy water and give it a really good scrub and clean. Clean the top, and that's when you put it away. Now, Nigel Dunnett has been one of the pioneers of creating public spaces that are gardened and landscaped in as environmentally and ecologically sustainable and friendly way as possible. And Arit went to see him in his home garden.
Over the past few years, Sheffield city centre has undergone a green makeover. Unloved areas have been transformed, bringing greenery, colour and sustainability to the inner city. It's largely thanks to Nigel Dunnett, a Professor of Plant and Design and Urban Horticulture. He's a pioneer of the ecological approach to planting gardens and public spaces. He's also renowned for big urban greening projects such as the London Olympic site and Superbloom at the Tower of London. Being one of the leading voices on groundbreaking approaches to planting design, you may wonder what Nigel's own garden looks like. Well, it's north-facing, it's steep, and it's based in an old quarry. Looking at all of the conditions of this site, it's not really the ideal space, is it, to create a garden?
I think a lot of gardeners will say, well, that's not really what I want. But for me, it presents so many challenges, but also so many opportunities, because there are lots of different environments, mini environments in the garden, that I could really exploit that to the full by making a garden full of different areas.
But I know that you're really passionate about ecology and ecological gardening. How does that play out?
It's a difficult term because it can mean so many different things. I kind of call it creating things which are high impact, low input, because it's all about not needing to add water or fertilizers or lots of other things. I think the most important thing for me is that it's about choosing plants that actually really fit the conditions you have. because to me it's about having things which flower for a long time, having that rich diversity of plants which support a rich diversity of life.
Well, it's certainly worth getting up the top.
We've made it up here.
We made it, it's fab.
This is the very top of the garden, so you know we have all these separate areas, and this is probably the most natural. This is the old woodland. I started to make these log walls here, and it's become a bit of an obsession. So, and you know they are fantastic habitats in themselves, huge wildlife value. But I think what I wanted to do was to kind of show you can be really artful with it and make them really beautiful things.
I love these log walls, but unfortunately I know I don't have loads of overgrown sycamores.
I mean, on a small scale, you can buy bags of logs.
Yeah.
They don't have to go on the burner, you can put them in the garden. But a lot of tree surgeons will be chopping up trees and logging them over the winter, and will often have material they don't know what to do with. It's worth approaching a local tree surgeon to see if they have any that you can take off their hands.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually. This is looking really interesting, Nigel.
Yeah, it's a small area of meadow, and we're just walking through the only bit of lawn in the garden, which is actually at 45 degrees, and partly because of that, I've converted most of it into the meadow.
I think people struggle with the idea, the notion, the actuality of meadow, don't they, really? Because it's stripping off the lawn and taking fertility down and then sowing the seeds and then waiting for it to come through, and when do I cut it? Yeah, it becomes really overwhelming.
It's really complex. So what I've tried to do is make it really simple. Working with what we have, stopping the mowing, the regular mowing, letting the grasses and the other plants in it come up, and then carefully choosing plants which are going to deal with those conditions.
So you've got the geranium up there. Is that geranium patricia?
That's geranium patricia, which is perfect for these conditions. It's a real trailing, winding geranium that just finds its way amongst the grasses and pops up like this, and it will flower right the way through till November.
Yeah.
This is a Shasta daisy, Leucanthemum Becky, which has tall, straight stems that lift the flowers above everything else. And then Iris siberica, which flowers in May and June with lovely deep blue flowers. And it's got the great seed heads coming now.
And when you're planting into here, Nigel, what sort of sized plants do you put in?
Well, I use 2-litre plants, really good sized plants.
Yeah.
You water them in as if you were doing it in a normal garden border.
Yeah.
And then that gives them a real head start, and they produce quite substantial plants which can compete in this situation straight away.
And the best time for that would be?
Really, any time from probably October onwards through till March.
Okay. Another area of this garden that I really love is this grove of trees. I think it's very clever. What Nigel's done is taken 1 metre bare root whips, which is the cheapest way that you can buy trees, and has planted either 2 or 3 together to create these multi-stems. It means that they compete with each other a little bit, which means that they will be a little bit smaller than if you were to buy a multi-stem tree. But that's what you want. You want the trees to establish in the space that they have. Paper birches, of course, they can get quite tall dependent on the amount of nutrient resource that's there. That could be thinned out, but the same could be done with something like amaryllis. Crabapple could be done, or a rowan. But it's great how in a small garden, a small space, you can create almost your own mini woodland, which is great for habitat, and in a changing climate, really good for giving dappled shade as well. Absolutely love it.
As we come down nearer the house, I can really play around with planting, with colours and with textures, a lot more traditional in a way, but it still has that really natural, quite wild character. This is self-supporting, there's nothing here that falls over. And it's tightly packed. I couldn't get in there any way to look after it, so it has to look after itself. As we get later in the year and into winter, this all ripens off into wonderful seed heads which catch the light. So it's a really long season part of the garden.
Well, and as also with you, Nigel, it's the high impact again, isn't it? Low input, though. Oh, look at this.
Yeah, this is the front garden.
the gardens that keep giving, Nigel.
This is quite special actually because it's a rain garden. The principle is try and keep every drop of rain that falls on the garden as close as possible to where it falls,
Yeah.
rather than it all rushing off into the drains and causing problems elsewhere. The downpipes, which normally go straight to the drains off a roof, I've cut it off and then it opens out into these rain gardens. You could have, let's say, a water butt,
Yeah.
which captures some of the water. That could overflow into a pond. You could have all sorts of features to try and keep as much as possible in the garden. The type of plants that grow in good garden border soil are perfect for this because they can get their roots down, they can, because of that, really tolerate any dry times, but they're also happy to have bursts of water coming over the top of them.
And you've done the design trick that is so important. It is a small space, but it feels big because of the density and the height of the plants.
Yeah, I deliberately used giant plants. This is Miscanthus giganteus, about 3 metres tall. They stand right the way through the winter. Cut them back in March, April, and I have hundreds of garden canes to use.
Yeah. Well, Nigel, I have to say, you have created a spectacular garden on such a difficult
It's
site.
been hard work.
But the hard work's paid off, and, you know, all credit to you. This type of gardening is so important for the future, and I love the fact that it's got the ecology part of it, but it's still a beautiful aesthetic space. So thank you for taking
That's
me
what
around.
I've tried to achieve, so it's been a real pleasure showing you.
I had the privilege of visiting Nigel in his garden this summer, and I can certainly concur with Arit that he's managed to make a garden that is rich with wildlife and encouraging and nurturing the natural world and still look really beautiful. And I think Nigel would approve of the amount of butterflies that are feasting on the mound here. And what they're eating are the pears that I've left on the tree that for some reason have been damaged and are now rotting. Rotting pears are not so good, but it's great for the butterflies. They love the sugar from the pears. And one of the good things about keeping nettles in your garden is that the caterpillars of these butterflies feed on the nettles. So because we've got nettles all over the garden, there's plenty of food for the caterpillars. These then hatch out into the beautiful butterflies, and with any luck, they'll overwinter too. So if you've got a shed or somewhere, don't make it too tidy, because it's a brilliant place for them to spend winter and maybe lay eggs next spring. We're going to visit a gardener now who has created a garden that expresses her love of wildlife, also has been very important in restoring her health, and if that wasn't enough, is the material for her superb artwork.
I judge a garden on how much it buzzes. If it's full of bees, butterflies, then it's a success. My gardening style is very much nature first. I plant for pollinators and it's quite wild. My name's Sarah Holland and this is my nature garden in Worcestershire. We've lived here for nearly 5 years. When we moved in, it was pretty much just mud. The first thing we did was dig a wildlife pond. For me, there's nothing more important in a nature garden than to have a water source. And as soon as we built it, there were water beetles in it. We had frog spawn, and it's just grown from there. It's full of newts, which are just stunning to watch. For me, it's the focal point of the garden. It's so important for wildlife, but it's also really important for me to be able to sit mindfully, just observe nature. Yeah, it's wonderful. I worked as a data officer for 13 years. Working in a high-stress job was not good for my health. I was unfortunately diagnosed with ulcerative colitis about 6 years ago. So that gave me a real push to put myself first and to really embrace gardening and surrounding myself with nature. And it really helps to improve my mental health, my well-being, my physical health. It absolutely enhances my life. I kind of just let plants grow where they want to grow. So it's quite a naturalistic style. For me, there's no such thing as a weed. They're all welcome. They all provide for wildlife, and they're absolutely beautiful. Working with nature and embracing the fact that the garden might not be perfect because it's a wildlife garden, but that makes it all the more special to me. We have bird boxes, bat boxes, log piles, areas that are completely wild, and all of that combined is really drawing nature into the garden. Late spring and that transition into summer is the most perfect time in the garden. Everything's luscious, it's so full of hope. It's just absolutely glorious. I really love cottage garden flowers. They're great because they tend to come back every year, so that reduces the amount of work you have to do in the garden. I love anything that self-seeds because you just don't know where it's going to pop up. So the fennel is one of my favourite plants in the garden. I really love scabious, the foxgloves. I think flowers evoke memories for a lot of people. My gran was a huge inspiration to me. She was an incredible florist, and she taught me how to grow flowers, how to appreciate flowers, and how to press flowers. Flower pressing is a really old art, but it was lovely that she passed those skills on to me. The most emotive plant in the garden is the forget-me-not. I pressed a forget-me-not flower when my grandma passed away, and it's just so special. And I think of her whenever I see forget-me-nots. I only ever take a really small amount of flowers from the garden for pressing. Most of them are left for nature. Simple forms work really well. So, for example, forget-me-nots, daisies, violas. Flowers that are more juicy, so full of moisture, thicker flowers don't press so well. So, for example, roses, foxgloves, bluebells. You can get success with the juicier flowers, but it does take quite a lot of practice. So I start with my flower press and a layer of cardboard and then blotting paper, and I carefully cut everything to size, and then I will place plants of a similar thickness on one layer because it means you'll get a more even pressing overall. These buttercups are a nice simple shape. I really love working with wildflowers. Yellow flowers tend to retain their colour really well. Other colours may change in the press. So, for example, pinks quite often turn a really deep indigo blue. Whites will often turn quite a vintage cream or brown colour. These are some of the pressings I've done over the last year. So you can see that the yellows retain the colour well. I really love pressing flowers with beautiful forms. So, for example, the scabious on there with the flowing stem, it just adds an extra element. So once I've filled the press, I always write the date that I did the pressing on, and then I write the date that I'm going to open the press, which is 3 weeks after the pressing date. So it's always an exciting moment opening the flower press. You never quite know what you're going to find. There's usually some absolute treasures and some things that haven't gone so well, but that's all part of flower pressing. Once I'm happy with the composition, I secure everything down with non-toxic water-based glue. I think there's something really special about pressing flowers. It's just really lovely to be able to capture all the seasons and celebrate the beauty of flowers.
I loved what Sarah was doing with her pressed flowers. It's such an old-fashioned, delicate, fragile almost thing, and yet the result is just beautiful. Now, these are padron peppers, chilies, and as most people know, they are a Spanish delicacy. You eat them green, lightly fried, with maybe a glass of sherry as an appetizer. But if you let them grow big, and especially if you let them grow red, they do get really quite spicy. And I discovered this last year. They were growing faster than we could eat them green. And the same has happened this year. So I've had plenty of chance to experiment on the best way of storing chilies. You can freeze them, and they freeze very well. You just put the chili, cut it, put it in like that, and you can either put it loose in a drawer or a tray, or you can put them into a bag. And the advantage of that is it keeps the fruitiness of the chili. For a lot of people, that's a major attraction. The other way to store them is to dry them. You can string them up. You can either thread them or tie them individually and hang them like Christmas decorations, but must be somewhere that is truly dry, and it's no good if it's a bit damp because of the risk of them going mouldy. Or you can do as I've done. I've invested in buying a dehydrator. Set the temperature, set the time, and they slowly dry. And then, when they're really dry, you can grind them up and then store the sort of flaky, powdery chili for years, if need be. They're completely dry, and you can get scores into one glass jar. Now, I don't know if Sue grows chilies, but she certainly has an allotment and is a good vegetable grower. And you might think that in the middle of winter, there's really not much you can do down on the allotment. But Toby joined her and found there was plenty to be getting on with.
Winter is often a quiet time on the allotment. Plants are dormant, there's less daylight, and let's face it, motivation can be in short supply. But if you can rouse yourself and get out there, it gives you the greatest gift a gardener can get: time. I've just taken on a new patch on the allotment, and with spring just around the corner, I know it won't be long until there's too much to get done in a day. So when Toby offered to come over and help me out, well, I was delighted.
Well, I like the look of this.
Yeah, well, I've got some broad beans to plant.
Ooh, yeah, these have got great potential for growing stuff in.
It's got a bit of manure in, it's a bit of compost,
Yeah.
and then I've chosen this variety, I've done my research, because I find staking a little difficult.
Yeah.
And these don't grow too high.
What variety have you gone for?
I've gone for Eleonora.
Okay.
Because they're supposed to not need staking, and they've got quite a lot of beans per pod, but less pods. We're sowing about 15 beans per container. I love these high-wall tubs as they keep out the mice. And I've got another allotment hack to protect my young beans. So to deter the birds, I've got a couple of options. You can fight with this.
Okay, I got it.
And I use the old freezer
Drawers, don't they?
drawers,
Yeah.
and they do seem to keep the birds off from pulling things up randomly.
This is classic allotment stuff, isn't
It
it?
is,
Waste not, want not.
It just gets them started, and once they're at a certain size, I can take it all off.
Yeah, brilliant.
So, bit of watering in, I think.
Yeah, good idea.
What's the latest date you can sow broad beans?
If you don't get it done by late winter or early spring, they'll grow, but you get loads of black fly. So you want to try and get them up and cropping before that happens.
Right, on to the next thing. My asparagus needs a little bit of attention.
Oh yeah.
I think it's time to remove all these dead stems. I'm very pleased because my great-grandfather was asparagus grower to the Prince of Wales. He had the
Ooh.
royal warrant, so I've really got to live up to a bit of family history.
I've got this mulch here. That's your compost. Is it your own mix?
My own mix, yeah. And I've read that we need to cover them. Is that to feed them or to protect them?
Well, it's to keep down the weeds, really. That's the thing. And they'll survive in quite thin ground. But if you get weeds amongst them, it just really starts to diminish the amount of crops you get because they just get out-competed. But one thing about winter gardening, you've got to take your chances. Because when we first came here, it was only a couple of hours ago, but this was gripped with frost. And now it's all melted, it's fine to put the compost on. But if I put the compost on when there was still frost on the ground, that frost would be insulated in the soil and it would really affect how quickly the asparagus comes up. It sort of checks the plant.
Yeah.
So you can only ever mulch when it's melted like this. Above zero, no frost on the ground, good to go. So have I got this right? You've got to wait another growing season before you harvest it properly.
3 years. And I planted it in 2021, and it's really difficult to avoid the temptation. It's like having a chocolate orange sitting there and not eating it. Thank you very much, Toby. That's looking nice and smart and organised now.
Fantastic. What we got here?
We've got onions.
Right.
I am struggling with my red onions. For some reason, they don't develop. My white onions are fine. My red onions are not. So I wondered whether you have some help or idea.
Is it hard on the ground where you've been putting the red ones? Because see that bottom, it's called the basal plate.
Yeah.
And if you push them in, you can damage that and that can really ruin the onion's chances. You should make a little hole and then drop them in, that's the way forward.
Right, OK. I might have been being a bit rough.
Really? Do you think that's what it was?
Yeah, because if it's not in fire, I'll get my foot toe and I'll go, because I usually plant the whites first, and by the time I'm getting to the reds, I'm probably a bit knackered.
Yeah, you want to switch it around this year.
Yeah.
See how
Start
you
the
go.
reds first.
Well, I'll tell you what I do is I just get a tray and I start them off in just a bit of multi-purpose, and then just setting them onto the compost like that. Within a week or two, they develop sort of lots of white roots.
If I see little roots, I'm not going to be mean.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think I've got a good feeling about these, particularly if you plant them before you put the white ones in.
Yeah, I'll do that. I feel a bit mean now.
You're running out of patience.
I'm running out of steam, I'm running out of patience,
Yeah.
I'm bored after doing 50 white ones. So, Toby, we've done the currant bushes and I want to create a row of raspberry canes.
Okay.
And I bought a raspberry called Joan J, which are,
I know it,
for
yeah.
me, spineless, which means they're much more friendly when you get close to them. And their fruits are 30% bigger than normal. And with my dexterity, I often find it quite fiddly to get the raspberries off. And these are quite firm, although apparently they're just as tasty.
What's all this about? I like the look of this.
So this is to contain the raspberries. So I've got a system where as they grow up, I'll thread the canes through.
Oh, genius.
And you can tie the raspberries in
Oh,
a season,
genius.
and when you want to cut them back, you take them all off and store the canes.
I bought bare-rooted raspberries, which can be planted any time between November and March. Soak the roots before you plant them and put them 40 centimetres apart in rich soil with plenty of compost or well-rotted manure. Joan Jay is an autumn fruiting raspberry. That means it has to be cut back to the ground completely every year.
I want to see how the poles are going to look.
Whoop, whoop, there we go. There we go.
Oh, it's a triumph. Yeah, love it. Fabulous.
Cup of tea?
Cup of tea.
Take the weight off our feet.
Wow, I think we've earned it. That was great. I've really enjoyed myself.
Thank you so much for coming to help me and all your advice. It's been brilliant.
Oh, pleasure.
And there's nothing like a polytunnel and a sofa and a cup of tea.
There's always a phase in winter when I'm quite glad that I can't get at the garden. It's sort of a relief, really, and I know one shouldn't admit to it. You should want to garden every minute of every day. But a bit of a respite through bad weather is no bad thing. But then there comes a point, certainly around about February, when I'm dying to get out there and plant. And these raised beds have made the ground drain a lot better, but it's still usually too wet and too cold to put anything into the ground. Oh, often until April. So I just have to be patient. However, what we've got, obviously we can harvest. And one of our favourite winter harvests is parsley. In fact, one of our favourite harvests is parsley. But in winter, we make pesto out of it. So it's good to have plenty that you can make a good amount of sauce with. And by cutting it back hard, you're encouraging regrowth too. And it will last until the weather gets really cold. It's hardly down to about -10. Right, I've got some of that. Let's take a few lettuce. These are little gem. Well, that's it for today. And next week, we have another special programme and with a very special guest, because Adam will be joining Mary Berry in her garden.
All you want to do is dip, so the end of the cocktail stick is damp, and all you're going to do is should just be able to dab one of them. There we go.
Look at that. You can see it against
It's good,
there.
isn't it?
That's more my scene.
We've all heard of pick your own fruit farms, but this is a cut your own flower field.
The idea of urban greening is to create green corridors through the otherwise built-up areas of our cities. It's great for biodiversity, as well as having lots of other environmental benefits.
Just look at this. It's beautiful, it's so lush, and it's all edible.
This enchanting garden is absolutely loaded up with allure, and it's just kind of saying, come and have a look at me. Come and explore.
And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in 3 weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.